Father believes the power of it will go if you know what you're fighting. Oh, come and stay with us. Let's fight this thing out together.
Power, I said. Power to walk into the gold vaults of the nations, into the secrets of kings, into the Holy of Holies. Power to make multitudes run squealing in terror at the touch of my little invisible finger. Even the moon's frightened of me, frightened to death. The whole world's frightened to death.
That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power!
You're listening to The Fear of God, a podcast exploring the intersection between Christianity and the horror genre.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another fun episode of The Fear of God. Here at this podcast, we discuss with fervor and passion and just a dash of humor that sometimes deserted, rarely populous intersection of the Christian faith and the horror genre. With you right now is longtime co-host Nathan Rouse. Typically with me is Reed Lackey, fellow co-host, fellow Gardner Webb alumnus. We usually record these things. I'm waiting here for him. I don't see him anywhere. I don't know if he's just, what are we going to, I don't know. I'm happy to just sort of chat the whole time, and sort of talk about a little bit of what we're doing today. And I don't really know how you end a gag about invisibility when no one can actually see what we're doing. But Reed, you're back. There you are.
At first I thought, it would be really funny if I just started saying something. But then I was like, no, I want to see where he goes with this gag. I want to see how long he takes it and how he pulls it out.
My only other option I wrote down was that you were tied up because you forgot the mustard. But that's a real deep cut.
That is a pretty deep cut. Oh my gosh.
Reed.
Yeah.
Hey man, so we are at episode 46.
Yeah. Good job.
46. And who would have thought?
I know,
right? That low those many episodes ago, we would find ourselves here at 46. And in fact, as I just attempted rather clumsily to allude to, we are on our penultimate Universal monster entry, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly
we have
right.
one, we've got a movie we're pairing with this one, and then we've got one more Universal monster and a companion to it. But today, as I attempted to make reference to a moment ago, we are discussing that lovely fellow, the Invisible Man. Before we do that, Reed, I just got to know, like, what you watching? What you reading? What you listening to? You like that? You like that? Do you really not know that's where I was going?
No, I didn't.
It reminds me of two ago when you were introducing it and you made this like strained look on your face. I didn't know what you were about. I thought you were building a big sneeze or something.
And then all of a sudden just broke into song. Oh, yeah, man.
You did.
Yeah, well,
I've got two. What you got?
So I just have one, and honestly, I was reluctant to mention this one because I'm still a little bit on the fence about how I feel about the show, but
that's okay.
My wife and I have started a relatively new show. It has finished 2 seasons, and we are making our way through the first of those. But it did get renewed for a 3rd season, and there's enough in it that makes me curious about it. It's a show called Colony. Have you heard about Colony?
Is that with Josh? What's his Holloway?
Josh Holloway. Yeah, it's with my son's namesake from Lost. It's a kind of a science fiction show, but there's a lot of mystery surrounding the particulars of this. But some presence, some group, we would presume aliens, has occupied modern day Los Angeles.
You could say some others.
Others, yeah, have occupied Los Angeles. And so there's a new regime in place. And what the deal is that in the first episode, Josh Holloway is recruited by the occupying, regime to be what he calls a cooperator, to where he kind of works for them. They've recruited his services. He's a former police officer. They've recruited him. He does not know that his wife is a major player in the resistance against the occupation. So that's what the entire show is about. She's aware that he's cooperating, but he's unaware that she's involved in the resistance. And so it basically is a suspense sci-fi thriller show revolving around that premise. First couple of episodes didn't do much for me, but about episode 4 or 5, it started to really pick up some surprises. And it's not only got Josh Holloway in it, but it's also produced by Carlton Cuse. So
yeah, that's funny. I thought he had a hand in it.
Yeah. So it remains to be seen exactly how we'll feel about it in the long run, but that's what we've been watching this week. My wife and I have been catching up with that.
Cool. Well, I've got 2 I've never seen Any Colony. I do like Josh Holloway.
I like him a lot.
But I'll let you tell me if this is worth getting to at some point. So I did a couple of weeks ago watch the movie It Comes at Night.
Yes, which I have not seen, but
feature. Well, the good news is there's not really anything I can spoil for you because I'm still not 100% sure what I watched. But this is a new movie. It's billed as, kind of a, kind of prestige horror film. It's got Joel Edgerton in it. Off the top of my head, I can't remember. The other male actor in it is, I don't know his name, but I was only familiar with him. He has a supporting run in the show Girls on HBO. But this is one of few movies where I can understand if someone not enmeshed in kind of the genre and the stuff that we kind of run in the type of media we run in. I can understand someone watching this movie and be like, "That's stupid. I don't get it." Because now the further I've gotten from it, the more appreciation I have for it. But it ended and I thought, I have no idea what I just watched. It reminded me a little bit of, if you've ever watched The Wire, if listeners have ever watched The Wire is just a show that now you've got 5 seasons and I guess, I can't remember, maybe it's 10 episodes per season. But when you start watching The Wire, the show just doesn't care if you get it. It just doesn't. Like the writing, the way, it's, you get the vague idea. Clearly it's about cops and drug dealers or something. But in terms of the actual plot and character relationships, it is really difficult in the first few episodes to get a handle on what you're watching. It's just very, very dense and academic from that standpoint. It reminded me a little bit of that in the sense that the movie never makes clear spoiler alert for some stuff here, but again, there's not a whole lot I can actually spoil of the movie. You're never really 100% certain what the threat is. It's very obtuse with some of its relationships and what has occurred to project these people into the circumstances they're in. There's just a lot. It is very content with you not knowing about. And at first, my first response to it was a bit of dissatisfaction, but not because I felt stupid. Honestly, it was like, I feel dumb watching this. I don't get it. But the more I read about it, the more affection might be a strong word, the more appreciation I have for it. So, definitely worth checking out. It's hard to say if I would say it's definitely not a must watch in the theater kind of movie. It's a more thematic kind of cerebral experience than it is like a big screen kind of experience. I mean, it's fun. Gotcha. Movies on the big screen are always fun. My only other what you're reading in this case, I've been doing some more reading than I have been for a little while there, but recently on NPR, I caught this author speaking and it sounded very intriguing, and this will all make sense in a minute. But the name of the book is The Trouble with Reality, A Rumination on Moral Panic in Our Time.
Wow. So light.
You like that? Right. Yeah. Well, actually, it is not as short as The Monkey's Paw was our content we covered last week, but I mean, it's only about 90 pages, which will make some sense if you understand that it's written in response to and in relationship to the events post-election 2016. Okay. And it's on NPR. Some might say it's of a particular slant, and that might not be too far off base, but the author is a woman named Brooke Gladstone. She's a co-host and editor of WNYC's On the Media program. But it was fascinating and really kind of contextualizes a lot of, for those of us who are extremely surprised by the events of November, and in fact, if not depressed by them, it really contextualizes a lot of things, and helps you sort of get a handle on, okay, how do I feel about things? And,
that's fascinating.
And it's interesting because it's not really from a faith perspective whatsoever, but it kind of ends on this note of, whatever comes, empathy is required. And so it was really interesting.
Wow.
It was really cool. Anyway, that's my 2 cents there.
Nice. Well, I'm looking all around and I can't really see how to go where we're going next. I'm trying to see what's next on the horizon, and it's
nothing
elusive.
That you can really see. Yeah.
No, it's something.
It's kind of intangible, perhaps.
Yeah. I feel like I'm just
translucent.
I'm seeing
opaque,
right
maybe.
through it. No. Yeah, it's not opaque.
It's not opaque.
No, it's not opaque.
No.
It's transparent. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow, that was really dumb, and I don't know.
Yeah, Reed, I really appreciate your attempt, however meager.
It was pretty meager.
That was a rather transparent attempt at a joke.
That's better
for this. So, what we're talking about tonight is a creature from the Black Lagoon, right?
No. We're talking about 1933's Universal classic, The Invisible Man. So it's not something that's often equated. It's interesting to me because of all of if people were just sort of trying to figure out the Universal monsters at random, they'd say Frankenstein, they'd say Dracula, they'd say Wolfman. They'd probably go next to Mummy, and maybe they'd remember Creature from the Black Lagoon. Invisible Man would be probably the last that would come to their mind unless they were readily familiar with them. Invisible Man is not really something that seems like it fits in with the rest of the group, of sort of the monsters category. But it is actually, not tipping my hand too much here, it is actually my favorite of the Universal monster movies. And still is, even after the rewatch. Like, it still is my favorite. With that having been said, and no pressure whatsoever, what did you think of it, Nathan?
I liked it. No, I'm trying to, there was nothing, secretive about that delayed response there. I'm just trying to process, my feelings towards it. So it was honestly a little jarring.
Really?
Well, what I mean by that is the Universal monsters we've seen thus far. This is going to sound funny because in light of Dracula, I feel like I'm about to say something in error here, but like this character is a real villain. Like,
yeah. Oh yeah.
He is a bad dude and does bad things. Maybe that's what it is. So you've got like your Dracula, which is a classical kind of monster in the sense of there's nothing realistic about it. Right. Which makes it sound like I'm saying Invisibility is realistic. I'm not really, but the violence that the Invisible Man perpetrates is very realistic.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, no question.
And so I think in that way, I was a little like, wow, this is a little on the heavy side. Everything else has felt kind of fluffy, kind of airy, kind of, dated. I think incorporating this level of, he may, whether he's visible or not, he is a man, a normal man, inflicting this type of violence on other men and, other folks it was a little, I don't know. I had this moment of like, I didn't know the story. I didn't know, what the context of, the character's affliction was. And so they really run with it. So yeah, I mean, I liked it. I think maybe another viewing would determine where it would rank for me. I still think for me, Bride is probably, of what we've watched, my favorite, because it's really interested in some really rich elements. But I can see why The Invisible Man would rank high up there for you.
Sure. Well, so a couple of things about it, a couple of trivial bits. It's interesting that you talked about the character's villainy because counting on and off-screen deaths, including the victims on the train, Dr. Griffin kills 122 people in this movie.
Right.
Making him categorically the most murderous villain in all of the Universal monsters. Because Dracula, while we know him to be a nasty vampire, in the course of the film, only claims like 2 or 3 victims. And then there's the brides, which we would assume they're victims beforehand. But, Frankenstein really doesn't kill that many people. And, there's a sympathy to his character even as it is. So yeah, Griffin is alarmingly murderous in his path, his reign of terror, as it were.
Well, and I think to draw a line between both of what we were saying there is, again, Dracula, you could make the case he's a quote unquote villain, but he is also just acting out of instinct, right? Frankenstein is just a sort of misunderstood creature. The Wolfman is afflicted by things beyond his control. He is actually not actually in control when he's the Wolfman.
Sure.
The Invisible Man is a murderous human. Like
he's
just no kind, you could say, oh, well, this, the chemistry inherent to the whatever stuff he's taken is causing this. And maybe there's a case to be made there, but in many ways, he's very much in control of his facilities,
absolutely.
Of his faculties.
And it's funny because like in the novel, and I have another comment to make about the novel in a second, but in the novel, written by H.G. Wells, the, character of Griffin is insane before he becomes invisible. But in the film, in the film, he's, it's the chemicals that make him, insane. What's interesting, I don't know if you stumbled upon this in your research, but the screenwriter, when he was hired, he asked Universal Studios for a copy of the book, and they didn't have one. And so what they had 14 different treatments from previous writers, including one that was set on Mars. But the screenwriter searched around and found a copy at a local bookstore and read it and thought it was the best possible version of this story. So he made his screenplay pretty faithful to the novel, as it were. There's a few changes here and there, but really they're relatively minor, especially when compared to the adaptation of Dracula or the adaptation of Frankenstein. Invisible Man is very faithful to its source material. A couple of other just brief trivial bits. Of course, it was directed by James Whale, who directed Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. It was directed following the success of the original, but prior to his being convinced to direct Bride of Frankenstein. And speaking of Frankenstein, Boris Karloff was offered the title role, but he declined since the character would not be visible until the final frame.
Actors.
So he declined. I know.
Well, and I don't have this data, these trivial bits in front of me, but what I was reading was this particular actor was cast for his voice, right?
Claude Rains. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
A very distinct. He enunciates very clearly. He's got powerful diction. In fact, when the film was rescreened several years, I think in the 50s, Claude Rains took a family member. It might have either been a son or a nephew or something. Took his family member to see the film, and the ticket agent recognized his voice.
I did see that. Yeah,
tried to let him in for free, but Claude Rains was like, "No, I want to pay for my ticket." Claude Rains is I don't know if you remembered this or if you recognize the voice, but he is the inexplicable dad of the Wolfman.
That's funny because I knew I recognized the name. I actually didn't recognize the performance, but I recognized the name.
So he would later.
He didn't look the same in the other one,
right? A couple of other actor call outs, and then we can move into likes dislikes. So you might have recognized Dwight Frye again, who played Renfield in Dracula and played Fritz in Frankenstein. He makes a cameo as a reporter near the end of the film. When they're trying to figure out how to stop the Invisible Man menace. Cool. It's literally just one scene. But the other sort of cameo that made me happy is I had forgotten that Henry Travers is in this. He's the actor who plays Clarence the Angel in It's a Wonderful Life. He plays Dr. Cranley in this, and it just, I don't know, it just makes me happy whenever I see that guy, because I just think, an angel's going to get his wings eventually. But
maybe one of those people on the train,
It's maybe, who knows?
Well, I'm gonna throw another casting note at you, which would fall into my sound dislikes. The lady in the saloon. She's the worst. God, I can't.
Oh my gosh, Una O'Connor.
That's the Bride of Frankenstein lady, right?
Yeah, and
she's terrible.
She is at her screaming best or screaming worst.
What in the world?
Oh my gosh!
What's funny about it is my wife, who normally avoids these movies for their content, And subject matter, like I told her, I was turning it on. I was like, it's probably pretty tame. You don't have to leave.
Sure. Yeah.
And then within 5 minutes, this woman is shrieking her head off literally for sustained seconds on end. And it's like, my wife gets up and leaves. Like, I don't blame you. I want to leave. That's awful. Jeez, man.
And when it's so funny too, because when there's at one point where she just sets some water or something down next to her husband and just staring at him, and then all of a sudden it all starts again. Like, there she goes again.
It's terrible.
Shrieking.
It reminds me of, this is a leap, but it reminds me of Mark Wahlberg in The Happening. Like, the director needs to say to this person, this is not working. Why is this getting in here?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, she's pretty outrageous. Yeah, I had that written down, but for the life of me, it makes me laugh, but it definitely, it would get on my nerves. And particularly the first viewing several years ago, whenever it was, I remember taking note of like, what is wrong with this woman? Like, it's all she can do is just scream. But
I'm surprised she was not the first fatality.
She makes it. She survives.
Right. Wow.
Oh man. But given that, with a couple of exceptions, there's a couple of scenes that look a little dated and look a little hokey, but the effects are surprisingly, no pun intended, effective. Like when he's unwrapping, when he's unbandaging his head, that's great. I don't even know how they accomplished that entirely, but well before CGI, so it's a practical effect. But that was really, really wonderful.
That's the magic of the moving pictures, Reed.
Ta-da! Yes.
Welcome to Hollywood.
The last sort of dislike I have, which actually could act as a scare unless you have some more likes, dislikes. I call it the Reign of Terror sequence. It's the when he's full bore on the loose and there's search parties and people are locking their doors and bolting their windows, but he's, catching people on the search party and killing them, and just his whole sort of reign of terror culminating in the train sequence. That I just think that's really great. It's chilling and it's a little unnerving, but I think that's one thing, to your earlier point. That's something that watching these all in succession throughout the year, that's something that I've noticed we're missing from most of these films, is a kind of this is the monster is loose sort of moment. There's a scene or two here and there in the other moments, but nothing like what you get with Invisible Man, where it's full blown like, oh man, he is on a rampage and has to get
because the other
stopped.
Stuff is much more isolated. It's kind of one-on-one encounters and things like that.
Right.
Yeah. For me personally, with, kind of likes, dislikes, I do definitively dislike that actor's performance there, which is funny because she perfectly works in the movie. Other than that, she looks like a saloon marm. She just feels of a kind with the material at work, and then does that. And you're like, God, shoot her.
Yeah.
I hate guns. I love the piano gag at the saloon. That's a lot of fun. When you think he's playing the piano and he puts the coin in. Two of my favorite scenes. One is, the disembodied pants skipping down the road.
Oh my gosh, as he's singing.
Yeah. My favorite is the Keystone Cops, when the head guy says he's mad and he's invisible and he may be standing right here. And this whole gaggle of cops just look around like squirrels. Like, what? Here? Where? What do you mean he's here? Oh, it's just so funny. Just great, a great comic touch.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, overall, I think that, I did like the movie. For me, you were brushing up against this a minute ago. I think the only thing I wrote down for scares is kind of a general note. Just the phrase I wrote was surprisingly violent outbursts. Not knowing the story, not knowing where the story was going to go. I was a little again, jarred is a good word by just his level of, and to use your phrase, reign of terror. There's definitely some high stakes here.
Sure.
So yeah, that's kind of the only thing I would cite as just a scary element.
Well, the only thing I would mention, other than calling back to the first reveal of him unwrapping the bandages, that was pretty freaky. Kemp's death scene gives me genuine chills. Kemp is the character who he sort of blackmails into helping him for a little while, and then Kemp goes to the cops.
Right.
When Yeah, when they orchestrate their plan, get him out to the car, and then suddenly Griffin is talking to him. I'm like, oh man, it gives me the chills because I can picture that now, and that's actually a diversion from the novel. In the novel, Kemp's character survives. Actually, he is threatened by Dr. Griffin, but he makes it out. So it's interesting that he dies in this one, but I think that scene might be that one, and when Dr. Griffin is first unraveling the bandages to reveal his invisibility, that Kemp death scene it might be my favorite moment in the movie. It's really great.
Well, what to you, I mean, articulate a little further if you can, as you assess these movies, and I myself and possibly some listeners still have Black Lagoon left. Like, what to you raises the bar in this one over the others? I
think one of the things that really elevates it for me is it feels very unlike the rest. Yeah. And maybe that's part of what appeals to me about it is it actually feels, so the rest of them feel very old and very classical. They feel very theatrical. We've commented many times as we're having the episodes about the theatricality of these films. Sure. And it almost feels at times like you're watching a play, which of course with Dracula, you were watching an adaptation of a play. So that's not far removed. And, we've commented on that a couple of times. There's 2 or 3 settings, lots of talking heads, but there's an expansiveness to this story. This one feels much more cinematic. It feels more broad, which is ironic given the fact that this is the third in chronological sequence. So if we were watching them in chronological order, we'd have gone Dracula, Frankenstein, and then this one. So this was relatively early on, sure. But I think that's what really appeals to me about it is it feels more like a cinematic piece rather than like a theatrical piece. And I think that combined with, we've already called out to, he's a proper villain, and that just for some reason raises the chill factor for me, which makes it all the more impactful. Plus it is pretty freaky to think about. Like, I don't know if you saw this. It's an absolutely terrible movie. And if you haven't seen it, like, don't bother. But, and listeners, it is definitely not the companion film, but have you ever heard of Hollow Man? From
Kevin Bacon,
2000s, Elizabeth
Shue, So
I saw that film and it's atrocious, but he does say one thing in there that maybe we'll come back to in themes, which we can move into now if you want. But Kevin Bacon has a line in Hollow Man where he says, "It's amazing what you can do when you don't have to look at yourself in the mirror," and that idea frightens me. Sure. And I think that's something maybe subtextual that's going on when I watch this film is this recognition in myself of like, man, if I knew I would get away with it, like if I knew I wouldn't be seen or caught, what would I be capable of? And it's actually frightening.
Put a pin there because I'm curious because you're swimming into the pool. But before we go there, I know some of these Universal movies have follow-up entries. Is there any other Invisible Man material?
Yes, not with Dr. Griffin. Dr. Griffin firmly dies at the end of this film, but there are future films, The Invisible Agent, which is really not very good. There's one called The Invisible Man Returns, which I think I would need to look it up, but one of them stars Vincent Price. There are a handful. That's what I mean when I say this is one of the core films of the Universal Monster series. Universal had several horror films that they never did a sequel to. Phantom of the Opera, they had Hunchback of Notre Dame. Those films they made, and they would easily classify in the horror genre, but they're not core franchise films where there were future sequels. But there was to The Invisible Man. There were at least 3 that I'm aware of. So that's what kind of constitutes, in my mind, categorizing this that way. None of them pack the punch that this one does, in my opinion. Well,
you had started taking us into the waters of the themes here, so we can put our floaties on and go into the deep end here. It's funny because to your point, like you just used the phrase of cinematic versus theatrical to compare this to some of the other Universals, and I think that's relatively appropriate because in some ways, like Frankenstein or Bride of especially, like it feels like it's going for lofty lofty ponderings, right?
Right, right. Sure.
So in that way, it is kind of theatrical. It is more kind of culture. It is more, what does it mean to be X, Y, or Z or whatever. Whereas The Invisible Man, it feels like the intention is to examine this particular character, and those sorts of thematic things just sort of spin off by default. Does that make sense?
Right. Sure. Yeah.
And so it's really interesting to watch it from that standpoint. So in that way, it is kind of cinematic. It's very, as naturalistic as An Invisible Man is, it's a very naturalistic approach to the story, to these themes in particular. And it's funny, I wish you hadn't used this word a minute ago, because I was proud of myself for bringing it in. It looks like I'm now just aping you. We'll get to in a minute when you quoted Hollow Man, but I just wrote down that age-old adage, the character is who we are when no one's looking. And I really hate that line, not because I don't find it to be true, but because of how true I do find it. And I would add to that. So I would say, yes, character is who we are when no one's looking, and then would add the phrase, even ourselves, even when we aren't looking.
Right.
And something I wrote down was, and this is where that word comes into play, faithful living requires tangible presence in the mirror of your own life. Like you have to look back at yourself and interject as you want, but I'll run off at the mouth for a moment here. But
yeah, please do.
I was just pondering this because I'm with you. What's fascinating about this movie is when he is up in the saloon, in the hotel room or whatever, we call that place. It's
like a bed and breakfast.
Yeah. The Airbnb of 1933. This was the first time in one of these movies where I had like a sort of visceral response. And what I mean by that is you do start to ponder like what happens when you're untethered from tangibility. And you can say that on a metaphysical level, on an existential level, on a literal level. And the thoughts that followed out of that was that invisibility permits us to act on every impulse. That there is no such thing as taking thoughts captive, of meditating, of considering. We think a thing and then we do a thing. And you may challenge this notion a little bit, but I was just trying to create or imagine what is the analog of this sort of experience. And what I came up with was that, in our current society, which is funny because of what the things we're using right now, I said in our society that keyboards and screens create invisible men. That when there are no tactile, tangible tethers to a physical world, our impulse control is non-existent. This was what was coming to me. I said, we become adulterers. We become pornography addicts. We become closet hateful racists.
Oh, wow.
That invisibility, the ability to say and do things without repercussion, divorces us from the empathy required of a faithful life. Does that make any sense at all?
Oh, no, it absolutely does. Yeah.
We watch something like The Invisible Man and it's, it's silly to see disembodied pants skip down a road.
Right.
But the implications of the whole thing, if we miss out on the implications, we're in trouble, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Because that movie is speaking as much to the possibilities in our current state of life and the world we live in than it would have in 1930 when science fiction like this is literally just fiction.
Sure.
It's why we see people act out the way they do, because they've been operating invisibly behind a computer screen for days and weeks and months and years, and then act out in the real world in response to the persona they've created in there. Does that make any sense at all?
Oh, yeah. Because, and we've talked before on this show about integrating the physical and the digital self. And I don't remember if we put it in those terms, but just making those two cohesive. And I can't remember in fact, I'm pretty sure we didn't bring it up in this context when we had that conversation. But it is true that it's important to make your digital self match your physical self. But it's also true that it's important that one have more influence than the other, and that you understand that who you are in the digital world can't suddenly take over and become your physical world. Because I do feel like, and I don't know if this is precisely what you were articulating, but this is what I heard and what was kind of firing off in my brain as I was listening to you. We do create neural pathways of least resistance to aggression, to boldness, to be. There's this kind of mad power of anonymity. You look at a message board. Yes.
Yep.
Where my name would not be Reed Lackey on the message board. I mean, it might be. I could put a new username and a completely different avatar and say whatever I want to say. Vicious, nasty, awful, hateful, terrible things. And you do that enough in the digital world behind closed doors, it's not going to take that much resistance to begin being that person outside, elsewhere. And it's just fascinating.
Well, and to tie that into the movie, it's, the progression is there. What starts as little gags and little silliness that he's playing on people turns into wrecking a train and killing 100 people.
Right.
And which isn't to suggest that, well, maybe it is to suggest because I don't think the leap is far from what you're describing in terms of a lack of restraint, a lack of self-control, a giving over to impulse in the digital, turning into acting out in the physical and in the real.
Right. Of course.
It's why after a Charleston shooting or after an Alexandria shooting, suddenly we're digging through these people's social media accounts to try to figure out what motivates these people because for better or worse, you are at your most, I hate even that this is a sort of reality, but you are your most you when you are anonymous.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
And that's a really jacked up thing to consider.
Yeah, it is. And it is frightening, but it is absolutely true that if you don't have an accountability to who you are, it was interesting. And I didn't know necessarily that the conversation would go here, or I would have looked up a bit more research about this, but there was an experimental theatrical experience that was done, I believe, in Chicago, where, and I wish I could remember the name of it. I heard about it on Freakonomics, but there was a stage production where the audience comes in. You're not told anything about the experience or the story or anything, and you're given masks, and you're told you're not allowed to speak, you're not allowed to take off your mask, and you're told fortune favors the bold. You're given those three instructions. You're not allowed to speak, you're not allowed to take off your mask, and fortune favors the bold. And then what the theatrical experience is these people would wander through this multi-floored warehouse where certain theatrical vignettes were set up. Actors would be fighting amongst themselves, or actors might be having sex. I mean, it was a very adult show. Actors might be doing something, engaging in some sort of either pleasant and palatable or horrific, but the audience would move among them. And they said it was fascinating to see, given the you can't take off your mask and fortune favors the bold. They said there were security there who would step in to protect the actors if need be, but they said some people would try to assault the actors and would start to get in, not necessarily to protect something they thought was going on, but because they knew they had a mask on their face and they would be to some degree hidden. You don't know that it's going to be me who's doing this thing. And one of the things that, piggybacking on one last thing that it made me think of, we would love to believe, and we frequently probably say, I would never do XYZ. I would never do that. I would never do that thing. And I think we too frequently ignore the capacity of the safeguard of visibility. And that if we are visible, there is that sort of awareness at present of hey, I'm being watched, I'm being monitored. But if that is taken away, I think it's important for us to realize that we are not quite sure how far we would go or what we were capable of if those safeguards were taken away. Because, and I'm thinking, to get kind of more into specific Christianese, as it were, like accountability groups, where people suddenly find themselves entrenched in, we were talking earlier about violent behavior or aggressive behavior, but also addictive behavior, where people suddenly find themselves entrenched in things that they can't escape from, but they have no more power to break free from because they were frequently left to their own devices, to their own freedom, to their own privacy, and knew they could do so with impunity. And so it's one of the really frightening things about it is I have to ask myself, am I doing what's right because I know that doing what's wrong will get me punished, or am I doing what's right because I want to foster goodness in the world? Am I doing what's right because I know it is the right thing to do?
It's the Matt Jameson conundrum.
Yes. Like why do we do what we do, and why do we keep from doing what we know we should not do? Yeah, it's alarming. I feel like maybe I was kind of all over the place, but you're just this subject is big.
Mean it's a broad. Yeah, it is. It really is, and at the heart of it is simply. I say simply, at the heart of it is why be good, you know, because to not be good you might be visible to someone and thus you're now accountable for those actions, or because you really aren't. I mean, these are broad, heavy questions.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, and I was trying, you know, to think of, because what's interesting about this movie, or the story, this concept, you know, because we've talked before about kind of the invisible among us as a sort of, not to be invisible as a positive thing, but from a positive perspective, meaning there are those whom society just overlooks, whom the church overlooks, whom we in our sort of middle class culture can easily overlook and maybe step on, you know, so there's that style of invisible, but I think this is something totally different. And I don't know, man, I keep thinking about that. One of my favorite groups, and I haven't really listened to their stuff in the last 5 years or so, but for a number of years, the band Waterdeep, and they had a song, one of their songs was, and although it may have been the lead singer's solo album, but the song was called Everybody Has Their Secret Lives.
Yeah.
And like, on the one hand, I want to rail against that. You know, it's like, no, you're supposed to be, not because he was saying something incorrect, but because I think he's saying something very correct.
Sure. Right.
But this is firing off so many different things. But, you know, something that haunts me is this notion of, you know, to your question of, am I doing this thing because I want to do good in the world, or am I doing this thing because it makes me feel good to do good, or whatever? You know, is it for me? Is it for God? Well, one, the fact that you can ask that question is a healthy thing.
Sure. Right.
But I can't get away from this idea that with invisibility, with anonymity, let's couch it in our context. We're not going to be invisible, but we do have the capacity to be anonymous in our digital comings and goings, and even maybe in the physical comings and goings. But that meditation, that consideration for activity goes out the window, and that you become sort of a victim of your own impulse. This may seem an odd correlation, and you can feel free to edit this out later if it doesn't land correctly, but we're recording in very much the wake of the Philando Castile ruling from that police officer.
Right.
And you know, I don't say this phrase glibly, but he kind of got off scot-free. Or rather, I don't say that cynically. It just is what happened. Well, I think the night of the verdict, or the day the verdict came in, Castile's mother recorded this Facebook live video. And I want to be sensitive in how we end up talking about this, but it was very hard and heavy and tragic and sad. And there was this sense in which she was sort of resigned to, because anyone can do anything and get away with it, go do whatever you want. And it was this really sad, scary kind of moment.
Right.
Because I watch it and got the impression she was basically saying, you know, violence in response is okay. And where I want to be sensitive here is, this is a woman who is experiencing extreme levels of anger and sadness and grief that we just aren't going to know. Right. Not even just because her son was taken from her, not just because how her son was taken from her, but also because of what happened in the wake of her son being taken from her the way he was.
Right.
So I'm very, very sensitive to that. That requires a lot of handling with care. But all I could think while I was, it was one of those things where I kind of shouldn't watch the video, but you're kind of, it is like a train wreck. You just kind of can't look away. But I kept thinking, no, someone take this phone away from her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because she needs to grieve, and she needs to express her anger in healthy manner, in healthy fashion, and broadcasting for the world isn't that, but it's the result of anonymity.
Yeah.
It's, you don't see me. Now I'm going to do whatever I want. Does this make sense at all?
Yeah,
Is this connecting at all?
Yeah. I think I understand what you're saying.
There was a lack of meditation because she's in the depths of despair, to quote Anne Shirley.
Sure.
Like there is, I can't imagine a lower place for this person to be emotionally.
No, of course.
So because of that, she has permission to not have meditated or gotten over anything yet.
Right.
But in those places is not the place where you start acting out. Is this making sense at all?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I'm going to stop talking a little bit so that I don't,
Let me see if I can. Let me regurgitate back what I'm gleaming from it, and then you can redirect or course correct if we need to. Because we have a false perception that so much of what we do is hidden from so much of the rest of the world, or that we can do so in a hidden manner. Let's use the means of 2017 broadcasting. I'm sitting in a room right now talking to my best friend, and it's just us. I mean, my son's in the house, but it's just us right now having this conversation. But at some point,
because he's getting neglected, and so it's just us.
He's just playing. But what eventually will happen is this will go out onto the airways, and it will go everywhere. Like, everybody will hear it. If you and I were not actively aware of the fact that this will be heard beyond this room, we could very easily begin to slide into something that was a bit more destructive and a bit more sort of raw, as it were. And some people do that. And a lot of times what I get scared by with the Facebook Live, or with the just social media presence in general, it's what I didn't coin this term, but I cannot remember where I heard it. It's keyboard courage. Where, like, because you're sitting here, you're able to do things more aggressively than you would if you were speaking face to face to somebody. And I feel like in the case of poor Philando Castile's mother, like in the case of something like that, I feel like there can be such an inclination to want to express yourself, want to react to whatever you're experiencing or whatever you're feeling, to react to the situation, to react to the circumstance. And if we don't take care to make sure that our spaces are safe, and to make sure that the outlets that we have for them are equally safe, then we will perpetuate more of what we put out there in the world. In other words, we will sow seeds, and we'll sow the wind and reap the whirlwind, as the scripture puts it. And I feel like, so when I hear you talking about or trying to articulate this, and again, maybe I'm just fumbling through this, and maybe we should sort of pair around this.
I've got you can finish your thought, because I've got something.
Yeah. So all I was going to say to wrap a bow on my comment there is, there's a way in which we can acknowledge that our name will not be known and our face will not be known. But then there comes a point where we engage with the outlet so often that no longer even matters. So now it does not even matter that our name will be known and our face will be known. Now we've just created the neural pathways to just put that out there in the world.
Right. Well, and I want to try to put a button on where I was going with the Castile reference, because I don't want it to just seem like I was going all over the place without ended up landing somewhere, but I was working through those thoughts in real time. But
sure.
To tie it into the movie, you look at the movie in the film, insane or not, due to chemical exposure or not, once he recognizes the power inherent to his invisibility, he begins escalating his acting out. This mother, not even necessarily interpreting incorrectly, has been told by a justice system from top to bottom that you are invisible.
Yes.
And she recognizes that, realizes that, processes that, and basically says, all the rest of us are to do what you want.
Right.
Does this make sense now?
Yes.
It was just this real scary moment of like, man, this is so sad and tragic and traumatizing. It scares me to, this is what happens when a civilization, a society tells people through its actions or inaction, you are invisible.
Yes.
When you are told you are invisible and made to feel that way long enough, there's going to come a moment where you will start to feel some power attached to that because of your anonymity now.
Right.
And this is what ends up happening. I don't know. Hopefully that makes a little more sense than where I was earlier.
Oh yeah. So now suddenly the pistons are more readily firing.
Right.
Because the idea that I get back from that is, oh well, we're not being seen anyway. So who cares? I mean, we're not, like you say, we're invisible to them anyway. So do what you want. Because if we're not seen, and we're trying to be upright citizens, trying to do what we think we are supposed to do, and we're not seen, we're not visible, then what's the point anymore? And I definitely can perceive a scenario in which that's what that fosters. You tell someone they don't matter long enough, then they're not going to. It's like the other adage. It's like if you tell someone they're worthless enough, they're gonna believe you. They're gonna, you tell someone that they're stupid enough, they're gonna believe you, and
except that the dark side to that, the other side of that coin is once they've believed that internally, there's a capacity in which that's going to turn on you, and that's a recipe for really bad things.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm sure that my initial response, probably neither of our faults, but I'm sure my initial response to yours was a bit more meandering than you would have wanted. But I feel
mine was meandering. It's a big sort of elephant we're trying to wrestle to the ground here, and it requires some thinking through, some live processing.
Sure. And that's to put it back on there. We explore here. We don't explain, and most of the time, you and I don't even fully debrief, if at all, these conversations before we have to. So a lot of this happens in real time. But I do hear what you're saying now, and feel very focused about, like, we probably beat to death the drum of you matter, you listener matter. It does not matter your racial distinction, your sexual orientation, your class system, your whatever. You matter. You matter. And we can talk about the nuances of station and circumstance and personality and situation. We can talk about all of those different things and how those fit into the larger context of faithful living, the larger context of morality and accountability. We can talk about all of that, but you are not invisible. You matter. You are not worthless. You matter. You are not nothing. You matter. Every single choice that you make has an impact on the world around you. And
but don't you feel like this is fun. This is good. So I think it has become so challenging in the current state of our culture is, as people of faith, we have said that a lot, and we've not lived it. We've not acted it out. No. And I think that's what is so oppressively challenging to me in these days is I can't help but feel like, and this is what burdens me in a very powerful way, and why I feel like a reshaping of language and activity are required to sustain healthy, faithful witness in the world. And that is, so much of what we have said has just been the things we've said. Right. It has not been, scriptures such as, you said to me, Lord, Lord, I never knew you. Right. It's not a thin line. There's a thick line between singing praise songs on Sunday morning and actually, in Brian Stevenson's words, being a stone catcher. Like being the one who gives the cold water, who speaks out actively on behalf of those who, not in a hyperbolic way, are invisible. Right. Are not seen and recognized by this culture that we are living in. And it burdens me on an almost daily basis. I get sort of clearly flummoxed by exactly how to manifest this in a real way, but I think that is, I personally, and I know you would echo this, but, hopefully folks who listen to us, this will resonate some too. I'm so tired of the lip service. Yes. I'm so saddened by the state of the world we live in because we made it that way. Yeah. Well, by lip service. And hear me, make it that way. Like recognize the nuance of that phrase. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, and let's, this just sort of works in my head as a possible way to land at home. Let's bring it back to this. People see right through lip service. It's transparent to people. You give them just mere lip service and they understand you're just shining them on. They understand that you're just telling them what you think they want to hear. And if a person does not feel known and seen and heard,
right.
If a person does not feel tangible to you, then your platitudes will fall on deaf ears. Your platitudes will make no difference whatsoever. And I think it's important, like this film is very much dealing with a man who is consumed by the mad power of anonymity. We've already dealt with that. But there's also, and we don't have time to go into all of this, but there's also the flip side of it too, that we do so at our peril to ignore those around us who are desperate to be seen, to ignore those who are desperate to be tangible to us, to have flesh and blood and face and need, and to have those things spoken into.
Right.
And, the scripture that I had in mind, and I bounced around on a couple of different ones. I'll bring in two very briefly. Isaiah 29 and chapter 29, verse 15. Woe to those who deeply hide their plans from the Lord and whose deeds are done in a dark place. And they say, who sees us or who knows us? But then also Psalm 90 and the 8th verse. I'm going to read the New Living Translation for this one because I'm chilled by what it says. It says, speaking of the Lord, it says, you spread out our sins before you, our secret sins, and you see them all. I think that one of the most terrifying and comforting, simultaneously, one of the most terrifying and comforting things is that we are not invisible to the Lord. We are not.
Sure.
Who we are, what we do, our hidden motivations, that we are very good at acting for the camera, for the world. We may be able to fool everybody else, but be not deceived. God is not mocked. And it is terrifying when we think we've fooled the system because we cannot fool him. And to me, it is deeply comforting when I recognize and feel alone and feel like, well, nobody else sees. He sees and he knows. And I deeply believe that there will come a time when the light of his presence makes all things visible and all things known. That those of us who are sort of harboring our deep secret sins, they will find us out. There will come a time where they will be made known. We will not be able to hold them forever because the Lord sees, the Lord knows. And if you're somebody who feels alone or feels desperate, take comfort in that. If you're somebody who feels rather arrogant and proud that you've gotten away with a number of things, take some heed and take some caution, because even the most invisible among us are not invisible to him. Boom.
On that note.
So that was a fascinating discussion.
That was unexpected.
But as we say on every episode,
you could say that we didn't see that coming.
That's true. That's a good point. Well, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but it's not the end of the conversation. So if you have more to say on that, I know we brushed up against some big elephantine subjects here.
That's a great word. That's a good word.
I know you love the words, so I'm just going to...
I do.
But I know we've brushed up against some rather gargantuan subjects. If there's anything that you have to add to the conversation, we would love to hear about it. And you can do so in a variety of ways. You can reach out to us. Probably the easiest and best way is through Twitter. Nathan, what is our Twitter handle?
@TheFearOfGod.
You can also like us on Facebook. There's a link to that through Twitter. You can post there or leave a comment on one of our posts. You can also follow me on Twitter @ReedLackey. And Nathan, where can they find you on Twitter besides The Fear of God?
@TheNathanRouse.
And you can also go to morethanonelesson.com to leave a comment on this post or any of the other official posts for these for this show. You can also email us, fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate an iTunes review. We certainly are in the... It's part of the mission of this show to explore, even if we don't always have all of the answers. It's definitely not the mission of this show to compartmentalize things into neat, packageable little bows. But I think that these things are worth considering, and that these things are worth taking heed for and worth discussing. All of that to say, thank you very much, Nathan Rouse, for having this discussion with me.
You're very welcome. I don't know if you recognize that we're skipping David S. Pumpkins here.
Oh my goodness! Look at that!
I know. How can you forget? How can I do that?
That is crazy.
The one and only David S. Pumpkins. We'll do it quickly and then we'll sign off. So, as we do every episode, every movie that we're dealing with here, we do measure by a very particular metric, that of David S. Pumpkins, the Saturday Night Live Tom Hanks Halloween themed character, which is lovely, and our unofficial mascot, and 3 specific categories on a ranking of 0 to 5, that being style, scares, and substance. So in succinct fashion, my good friend. So how would you rank The Invisible Man on style? On style, you got to remember, this is my favorite of the Universal Monster movies, so I'm going to give it a 5. I love it. Whoa. Wow. Yeah, all right. I love it. I'm going to give it, it had a lot going for it, on a certain level. I'm going to give it a 3.5. All right. And as far as scares go, for me, I think the conceit has a bit more sort of foreboding nature to it than the actual on-screen. So I'm going to go with a 3 on scares. Okay. As we say with every Universal monster movie, the fears are a bit dated. So I think I'm also going to land at a 3.5 for scares. What I love about it is not its fear factor. Right. And so how about substance for you, my friend? So substance, I think we've sort of bandied about some things that weren't necessarily in the text of the film. So for substance, sure. I'm actually going to give it a 3.5. I will land at a 3 on substance. All right. So that means that we give The Invisible Man our favorite ranking of anything, 7 out of 10, David S. Pumpkins. Generally on average, we love giving films a 7 because it's, it's a number of completion. We're generous. Yeah, we're pretty generous. We're generous fellows. In the spirit of that, Reed, next week, so this is our penultimate Universal Monster proper. What are we companioning this with? So, may seem a bit, we are definitely not companioning it with The Hollow Man, because that movie's awful. No, I wanted to go in a different direction, and I subjected you're welcome, and I'm sorry, to a viewing of 1986 David Cronenberg's The Fly. So, ladies and gentlemen, next week... Oh, I thought you were just referring to the Breaking Bad episode, The Fly. Oh, no. So you watched a different thing? Well, you've got a week. So, yeah, ladies and gentlemen, next week, we are going to be discussing I consider it an iconic entry in the horror canon. We are going to be discussing David Cronenberg's film from 1986 starring Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis, The Fly. So visit us at that point next week. And Nathan, again, thank you so much for having this conversation with me, man. I really appreciate it. You're welcome, my friend. And you're always visible to me. Oh, thank you. We'll see you next week, everybody. Bye.